Hi, I'm Ricky Thomas, and we're here with another edition of Covenant Conversations with Representative Edward Lindsey, who is running for Congress. Representative Lindsey, let's start back from the beginning. Where were you born, and tell me a little bit about your parents and your upbringing.
Well, first of all, Ricky, I want to thank you very much for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to come out and talk to someone like yourself and to be able to sort of chat about my campaign and who I am and sort of get to know people a little bit better up here at Cartersville. So I do want to thank you. My family comes from Georgia, very deep roots in Georgia. We go back, I believe, about 8 generations down in South Georgia. I grew up sort of split. My family grew up in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta, rather, and I spent every summer on my granddaddy's farm down in South Georgia, down in Wilcox County. So I went from the big city to the small town back and forth every year when I was a child. So it was very good for me to do so.
So you growing up, brothers and sisters growing up?
Two sisters, one older, Mary Stewart. She's 5 years older, and a kid sister who's 13 months younger named Jennifer.
So when you were growing up, what did you play sports? What did you like to do? What did you think you would be?
Oh, well, I hoped I'd be the next Pistol Pete Maravich. That was my all-time goal. I mean, I loved basketball. Anytime that you saw me as a young person, you would see a basketball within about 2.5 feet of me dribbling. Unfortunately, genetics caught up with me, and it turned out I wasn't going to be the next Pistol Pete Maravich. For those of you in the audience who are a little bit older, y'all may remember Pistol Pete. He went to LSU, and he was an absolute phenom, and then played for the Hawks. He was my childhood idol in basketball. But unfortunately, like I said, genetics didn't catch up with me, so I decided I better start cracking the books in high school.
So you played in high school, or did you play any beyond high school?
I played in high school, and somewhere around my sophomore year, when I realized that instead of being an all-star, I was a second-string guard on a team that was 2-9. I figured that I better start hitting the books a little harder.
Just a piece of, I guess, interesting. I played high school basketball with someone that a lot of people would know. You may know him as Cletus T. Judd.
Yeah.
His real name is Barry Poole. He's from Cartersville. And Barry and I played high school basketball together. So we always laugh and say that crazy Barry Poole is making a living just being that crazy guy he was when we sat down the end of the bench on the high school games. So what happened after that? You decided that you wasn't Pistol Pete?
I decided I wasn't Pistol Pete Maravich. I did play through high school. I then started cracking the books. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship out of high school to go to Davidson College in North Carolina. Got through Davidson based on that scholarship, and also on a vending machine business that my dad and I put together that went a long way toward me being able to graduate from a good school like Davidson. Then after that, came back to Georgia, went to the University of Georgia Law School. After graduating from there, I went and practiced law in a small town, Toccoa, Georgia, up in the northeast corner of the state. Practiced law there for 3 years, and after 3 years, some friends of mine enticed me to come back to Atlanta, where I was fortunate enough in 1990 to get together with those 3 people and start a little law firm to basically defend folks who get sued, including a large part of my practice defending churches and private schools, as a matter of fact. We've been fortunate over the years to grow that little business from just 4 of us to 80 employees in 3 states. So I've gotten obviously a good understanding for small business as a result of that.
Let's back up to high school years a little bit. You said you had some sisters. What you graduated in what year in high school?
I graduated from high school in 1977.
77. So what was it like in the 70s growing up in high school? What was the big thing where you were at that you did on Friday night or Saturday night?
Well, a lot of it was sports. In addition to sports, but there was also hiking. I was very much into the Boy Scouts. As a matter of fact, I was an Eagle Scout. So a large number of the weekends you would find me and a group of buddies through high school up on the mountain trails.
No girls involved in the high school years?
No, well, there were a few girls involved in the high school years, but I tried my best. Let's just put it that way. But a large part of my time was spent with my friends hiking and that sort of thing, and camping. I also was very active in my church. I was very active in a lot of other sort of extracurricular activities. In high school, I was a class officer and that sort of thing.
Since you brought up church, what church did you grow up in, and tell me a little bit about that.
I grew up at North Avenue Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, and was very active in that church. And then, like a lot of folks who get married, you know, the great first compromise of your marriage is that I'm a Presbyterian, she was an Episcopal, so we compromised by going to the Episcopal church.
I thought you were going to say Presbyterian Episcopal meant Methodist or something. But.
No, like I said, not in my marriage, and actually it was a very good thing for me. You know, like a lot of folks, like a lot of young men probably in particular, I wasn't terribly active in the church in my 20s, and fortunately I married the right woman who brought me very active back in the church when we got married.
Normally, you know, we sometimes discuss this a little bit later in the interview, but since you brought it up, tell me a little bit about your current situation in church and how your faith has guided you in your career, your political career, and what you're doing now.
Well, I think my faith is very important, and you know, and I came back very much to the church thanks to my wife, and I do, Elizabeth, I do thank her as much as I can for bringing me back to the church. Faith and my church are extremely important to me. We're very active in the church in terms of teaching Sunday school, particularly with 7th and 8th graders, and that's a very difficult 2 years to be teaching, but that's something that my wife and I have done for a good number of years. We've also been active in what's called the Education for Ministry the last 4 years. Basically, that's every Monday course during the school year that Elizabeth and I have been partaking in terms of Bible study. That's been very important to us. We've been very active in Habitat for Humanity. My church is located on the edge of a very tough area of Atlanta, and that's one reason why we chose that church, quite frankly, because we see Christ in action at that church. And we have a very active covenant in community, for instance, that helps to rehabilitate folks that have lost their way in terms of alcohol and drugs, and brings them back into the fold. It's sort of a tough love place, and it's being very important. So, you know, it's also a place that obviously that we were married in, a place that we've raised our children in and seen them baptized. And it's a place that, like I said, I came back to the church, and so it's very important to me.
We'll get to your marriage and children in just a minute. Having been an attorney, obviously dealing with law, and then being in politics, as a Christian organization, I certainly believe, and I say this, I've been very active in politics, but I don't believe that the kingdom of God comes in legislation, but it comes in demonstration of doing some of the things like what you're talking about,
Very much so.
demonstrating the love of Christ in the marketplace. Not that I'm against good legislation, obviously. Give me your philosophy and your role on what you think as a Christian legislator, what your role and duty is when making legislation, balancing between legislation and your faith. What role do you think that has?
Well, I don't think there is a balance, because I think my faith is part of my legislation. And I think, quite frankly, my lay ministry is found in my legislation in many areas. And I'll tell you about what I still consider to be my most important piece of legislation. It was not something I necessarily wanted to carry, but members of my church and other churches in my community came to me and called upon me to get involved in it. And that's the horrible sin on our state and on our nation called human trafficking. In which oftentimes it's young girls who become trapped by these monsters who pull them in, and these kids are literally slaves. And in 2010, the church folks came to me and asked for me to be more actively involved. They were frustrated that the problem was growing dramatically in our state. But unfortunately, we had not been able to get a bill even out of a subcommittee, let alone out of a committee or on the floor of the House or the Senate. And they asked me as the majority whip to take the point on that. I asked whether or not I was really the right person for it. And, you know, they made a very big point of telling me, you're the perfect person for it. You're male, you come from a suburban district, you're the sort of people that need to understand the problem. So I became educated by it. And I was able to pull in not only the churches that had gotten me involved, but also the Attorney General's office, prosecutors, social workers, law enforcement groups that don't always get along. And we were able to pull them together and say, look, you know, we all agree there's a problem. We can't seem to get this legislation through. What can we do? What does everyone think that we need to be doing? And we looked at it from a holistic standpoint. much the same way that folks do so with a lot of the different problems that churches have to deal with in society when they put Christ in action. And we look at it in terms of toughening the penalties, clarifying the law, providing a rope to those who are victims to sort of lead them back out of the path that they were found in, educating law enforcement. As a result of our efforts, and I do believe that you saw religion in action there, God in action there, because a bill that we could not get out of a subcommittee the year before, we were able to pass out of a subcommittee, full committee, floor of the House, committee in the Senate, in almost record time with only one dissenting vote. That, to me, was my faith in action. So when you start talking about, how do you divide or how do you balance your legislative life versus your spiritual life, I don't believe there is a balance. I truly believe that every vote that I cast, there is a moral component to it, even when it comes to the budget, or perhaps even more so when it comes to the budget, because you're making sometimes moral decisions on what to fund and what not to fund.
If you had to make a vote on anything, and it was a very difficult moral decision on which way to go, and you certainly could see both sides of the issue, and I know a lot of people think everything's black and white, and sometimes that's not exactly how that is. Sometimes there may be
I would say about 99% of the time, they're always going to be shades.
Yeah, they're very gray areas. Whom would you pick up the phone and call and to give you some godly spiritual counsel on an issue if you just wanted to settle in your heart which way you should go on the vote?
Probably, and well, not probably, I can tell you definitely because I've done it more than once, is my college roommate who's a Presbyterian minister in Texas now. He and I have been very close since college. We were best friends in college. I was the best man in his wedding. He actually officiated at my wedding. And our families have been very close. Our children are very close. And on more than one occasion over the years, I have called upon him to seek his counsel and his advice on matters of spirituality. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the human trafficking bill, like I talked about a moment ago, after I talked to this group and I called him, I said, I don't know if I'm the right person for it. He was one of the people that guided me toward carrying that particular bill. So he's obviously someone who's very important to me. Also, obviously, my home pastor, my parish priest is very important to me as well. But probably, if I had to name one spiritual advisor, it would be my college roommate.
Let's go back to high school. How'd you meet your wife?
I met my wife actually after college, after law school, and after coming back to Atlanta. My sister, Dennard, and she and my wife, Elizabeth, were close friends in Charlotte, North Carolina. And through my sister, I was able to meet my wife, and we had what you might call a commuter relationship. And much to everyone's surprise, she and I were a little bit older when we got married. I was 30. And, we got engaged in 7 weeks, much to, like I said, to everyone's surprise, and including our families. And, but it's been a very blessed thing for me, obviously, because we're now in our 25th year of marriage.
Kids?
3 boys. The oldest is 22, who is in his last year at West Point, the United States Military Academy. And then I have twins who are about to turn 21, who are at the University of Georgia. They're juniors.
Tell me a little bit about their personalities. What was it like having boys? And most families want a boy and a girl. They want some of both most of the time. And families lots of times that have all girls or all boys, that becomes a thing. So what's that like having all boys?
Yeah, the family joke is that, we wanted a girl, we had a boy. We wanted a girl, we had 2 boys. We decided to quit at that point. But we did make a point of saying that, every dog that's come into the family has always been female. I don't know what it's like to necessarily have a girl having 3 boys, but it's basically a rough and tumble place. The boys were, so close in age together. They formed a very close bond among themselves. I would say that the 3 of them are each other's best friends. Obviously, sports played a very heavy part of their growing up, as well as the outdoors in general. It was a madhouse on more than one occasion. And thankfully, my wife is a very patient woman.
We'll give you a series of quick questions
Sure.
with short answers. Favorite food?
Favorite food? Ice cream.
Favorite sports?
College basketball.
Favorite team? You don't have to lie. What's the Christian show? Tell the truth.
Davidson College.
David,
Wow.
well, you went to school there. Okay. Do you take off and watch the March Madness every year?
Absolutely. It's, you know, it's the closest thing to, other than my religion, that I would call my religion. I mean, March is an absolute paradise time.
Favorite vacation spot that you've been to?
My in-laws have a place off the coast of North Carolina called Atlantic Beach, which is a great little beach and fishing community that we've been going to for 25 years, and it is the closest thing to paradise.
Somewhere you've never been you'd like to go?
I've always wanted to go to Africa, particularly a safari in Africa. That's one. Yeah, that would be my favorite.
Television show?
Favorite television show, if I can be allowed to pick three.
Okay, sure.
NCIS. I don't know how many of y'all like that. I love that show. I love mysteries, and they always have a quirky end at the end, and the real test for you is to try to figure out who's going to be the one to actually have done it, because they've been leading you in the opposite direction. The second one would have to be Duck Dynasty. It's a great show.
You just so don't look like a Duck Dynasty guy, though.
I love Duck Dynasty. It is an absolutely wonderful show.
See, I always say it's
It
not my favorite.
reminds me, quite frankly, you asked me about my boys growing up. It very much is like my boys growing up. It's a bunch of guys pulling pranks on each other constantly, and then at the end of the day, they find a way to sit at the same table and say grace together after doing absolutely.
See, I always say it's not my
jokes.
favorite because that's like
Yeah.
everybody I know, they're all like that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not anything different for me. I mean, all the people I know are just like that.
But like the Duck Dynasty reminds me of my three boys. The third one, going in a very different direction, I don't know if you ever watched American Experience on PBS, but it's a history show, and each week it sort of devotes itself to one segment of American history. And you know, and I'm a great history fan. I was a history major in college. American history in particular has been always something that I've been devouring my entire life.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Casablanca.
Your first automobile was?
A 1972 baby blue Opel four-door that I inherited from my mother. It went from 0 to 60 in about 35 minutes if you were going down. It did not have any air conditioning. The heating system, the fan broke. And so the only way I could get heat in it was to try to get it up to at least 35 miles an hour. No radio either, because my dad insisted on that, because that was a luxury. But it still was
So
still a
that
great
make you
automobile.
very popular for people to want to ride with you.
Well, I knew that if a girl went out with me, it wasn't because of the car.
So if you were not an attorney involved in politics, and you had taken a totally different route, what do you think that might have been? What would have been something you'd have done that people might not have realized you would have wanted to do?
Oh, it's easy, because I almost did it, and that was being a history teacher.
High school, college, where?
High school.
What is it about high school history that you think that would have been your
Well, it's more about what it is about teaching. I love to teach. And the same thing that draws me to politics in terms of being educated and educating is the same thing that I love about the idea of being a high school teacher. My high school teachers, there were 2 or 3 of them that were extremely important in my life in terms of giving me back guidance. I told you earlier about how at one point I had to come to grips with the fact that I wasn't going to make it dribbling a basketball. I had to find some other way to make it in life. And I had some really wonderful teachers in high school that provided me that guidance in that last 3 years of high school that allowed me to go on to college and then go on to law school and everything else that I've accomplished. So I'm very grateful to them, and that's one reason why education has been very important to me while I've served in the General Assembly. You know, I chose to go on the House Education Committee before I became the majority whip. I chaired the Education Appropriations Committee because I've seen through my own personal life what education can do for me and what the right teacher can do for me. And I want to make sure that for this next generation they have similar teachers.
used a term that some of my audience may not know, in a short definition. Explain what a whip is.
A whip, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It really should be called the majority beggar, because my job is to try to, well, let me sort of back up. My job begins with trying to formulate the Republican conservative agenda for the next session, and try to build that coalition among my Republican caucus. And once that coalition is built, my job is then to help guide that legislation through the session. On the floor of the House, whip is an old term for rounding up the necessary votes to get a bill passed. And then I must also do the same thing over in the Senate. So it's part of the House leadership.
Which, from a Christian standpoint, is a very pertinent question for me, because I think, having been involved in politics for a long time, Republican politics for the most part, and that also,
Sure.
is that the Republican agenda, how many times have you bucked your own party on a bill or something that you just couldn't go along with your own party on?
A lot of times.
What kind of, just an example of one?
You know, there have been some times when I felt like a particular bill which was being pushed by, for instance, my friends at North Fulton, to split the Fulton County in two, a very popular position when it comes to my party. However, representing the area of North Atlanta that was not going to be in the future Milton County, I recognize that split would have been extremely detrimental to my community, and quite frankly, I think detrimental to a larger part of the state in terms of splitting Fulton County in two. And so I had to buck my party, and quite frankly, buck some of my closest friends in the House. I don't know if you've ever read the books Harry Potter or not, but if you have, one of the headmaster of the school likes to tell children that it takes courage to stand up to your enemies. It takes even more courage to stand up to your friends. And I think probably one of the most important things any legislator can do is to be prepared at times to stand up to their friends and say, no, I simply don't agree with you. I don't think that we're headed down the right path. So I have had, and I've just given you one example, but there are several times in which I have had to say, no, you need to go a separate way. And I think one of the reasons, quite frankly, I've been effective as a whip is that I've understood that. And when someone comes to me and tells me, look, Edward, I just can't go with you this time. I've got to go with my conscience, or I've got to go with my community. I've always slapped them on the back and said, this is just one vote. We'll talk again tomorrow. Because I always want to respect someone who feels compelled to follow either that inner moral compass or the needs of their constituents. And I don't believe it's healthy for anyone to be coerced to lose sight of those two very important things as a legislator.
A couple last questions as we close, more on the, family side. What's the greatest strength of your wife? What is it that she does that just absolutely helps you be who you are?
She's an extremely strong person when it comes to her faith and her moral compass. You asked who I would go to when it comes to a moral question, and I talked about someone outside of my family. Quite frankly, the first person I go to is my wife. She is not only the love of my life, but she's my best friend. And on more than one occasion, she has guided me back in when I perhaps lost my way. I often tell folks that in politics, one of the most important things you can do, particularly in a political campaign, is to have a strong spouse in the last 2 or 3 weeks when you are tired, when you are worn out, when you are worn down, when you don't think you can think clearly. And quite frankly, you sometimes don't think clearly. Having that spouse be able to step in and say, and quite frankly, put your good name and trust and hand it to them. And she's that one person that I can rely upon when it comes to taking my good name and putting it in trust in her, knowing full well that she will take good care of it at times when it may be difficult for me to understand, but it's the right way to go.
Favorite Bible verse or Bible story, and why?
A little bit broader than that, my favorite book is the book of James. And the verse in there, and it's always dangerous quoting verses to a pastor, but it goes something like this: the body without spirit is dead. Similarly, faith without good works is dead. And what that basically means is that we show our faith by the good works that we are called upon by God and by Christ to do. That is how you can tell a Christian by their good works. It doesn't, faith is what brings you to Christ, but the showing of good works is what shows the world that you are a Christian. I love the book of James because to me it is a practical how-to guide in terms of how you should be living your everyday life. You should start obviously with your faith, and then by virtue of your faith, you will ultimately do the right thing and do the things that God calls upon us all to do. So I love the book of James for that reason. It's a very short book, but it's one in which I think folks should read a lot more than this book.
Last question we close. In sitting down with a lot of the people running for public office in this congressional race, and of course a lot of others, even our local county we talked about, we're not here to judge, who's a better Christian, because I don't think that's kind of how that is. It's not, hey, he did this and you did. It's not tit for tat. That's not what we're trying to do. But what would you say in closing? What is it that Edward Lindsey brings to the table? Not from a, we got another thing coming up that we're going to have you to, where we're going to talk about some of those more political type issues. But what is it from your faith that you'd said, this is what I bring when I'm as a representative in Georgia, or if I'm fortunate enough to be elected to Congress? What is it I bring to the table, spiritually, Christ-wise, when I'm there?
What I bring to the table is the ability to bring people together. Two things. The great strength that I've had in my 10 years in the House and my 3 terms as the majority whip has been my ability to bring people to the table. And people oftentimes diametrically opposed on 90% of the issues, but on this one day, on this one issue, I feel like we can come together and we can put together the necessary coalition to do good work. And that's been my strength in the House, and my strength in dealing also with the Senate has been that ability to do so. I've been fortunate in the last decade to drive through the Georgia House over 35 major pieces of legislation. That's not because of me alone. That's because I've been able to listen to folks and to hear what they say, not just listen to them, but to hear what they say, and then to put together the necessary coalition of all the good parts in a bill, and then to move it forward and be willing to listen all the way through the process. I've taken great pride in the fact that I always believe that going into a committee, there's always a way to improve a bill. And so I've oftentimes had legislators who want to apologize to me for making an amendment, and I go, no, I think it's a good amendment. We're going to add that in there. So I think it's that willingness to listen to other people, to work with other people, to build that coalition of the willing at a particular moment, to recognize that folks that may be against me yesterday or tomorrow may still nevertheless be my friend today, and maybe somebody who I can work with. That's what I believe I bring to this contest.
Thank you, Representative Lindsey, for meeting with us on Covenant Conversations. He's representative in the state of Georgia, running for the 11th Congressional District here in Georgia. And we certainly wish him well, and thank you for tuning in for another edition of Covenant Conversations.
Thank you for having me.